Good morning, Bill. It's great to see you.
Great to see you.
So, Bill, a lot of people are saying that the United States is making a serious mistake by continuing to support Ukraine. It's already been more than a year and a half. It looks like there's a stalemate, a lot of people say, and this might just turn into a war that never ends. Do you really think it's in the US's interest to continue supporting Ukraine?
Of course it is. And the good news is a majority of Americans continue to agree with that. I mean, Democrats are pretty overwhelmingly in favor of continuing to support Ukraine. We're supporting them. We're not fighting there, right? For so many decades, I've been involved in so many foreign policy fights, and it was always we can't send American troops over here or there. And look, there are good reasons for being wary of that. This is a case where the Ukrainians are doing all the fighting. All they're asking for is our material support. That's what we're good at. We were the arsenal of democracy way back when, and we remain the arsenal of democracy. So the good news is most Democrats are fine. About half the Republicans have, unfortunately, under the influence of Trump and others, and of America First, and some very bad arguments that have been made, uh, faded away from their support for Ukraine. But I think if we could just get a vote in Congress, especially on the floor of the House, we'll have pretty strong support, bipartisan support, for continuing to help Ukraine defend itself, and hopefully enough money that will at least keep things solid for the next year. So I'm a little less pessimistic than some of our friends about the near-term future here. But I'm worried, of course, that we have a Speaker of the House now and the leading Republican presidential candidate who haven't been supportive of Ukraine.
But, in the current situation that we're in, Israel's under attack. There's a serious destabilization in the Middle East. I mean, shouldn't Ukraine take a back burner? I mean, they're totally unrelated issues in the eyes of most Americans.
Yeah, I know. You don't. You pose that argument, that question very well, as if you believed it. But it's a very fair question, and you and I don't agree with that. I think. No, they're very similar, really. Are we going to help democracies defend themselves against brutal aggression or not? And are we, especially democracies that are allies, that want to be allies, that in the case of Ukraine want to join NATO, in the case of Israel, has been an ally for a long time, or are we just going to leave them alone and hang in the wind? I don't think that's a close call. We know what a world looks like where the U.S. is not a reliable ally, and that's the world where the world that the U.S. had withdrawn from, or never really got involved in, and that's a world that led to two world wars, and subsequently, even during the Cold War, when the U.S. looked like it faltered, it encouraged aggression and adventurism on the part of others. Do we want other dictators looking around, other terrorist groups looking around to say, well, the U.S. isn't going to really be there, maybe for a little while, but then they'll back off. And again, it's not as if we're sending U.S. troops to Ukraine. So I think this is a very easy call. Putin's Russia has been a terrible regime, killed its own people, killed many other people, obviously, destabilizing force. We have the Ukrainians are fighting them, and for a very small part of our defense budget, with 3-4%, I think it is, we're helping the Ukrainians demolish an awful lot of the Russian army, which can't therefore be used against our NATO allies or against others in the future. So I think from a very cold-blooded national interest point of view, this is a very good investment, if you want to put it that way. And certainly from a moral and geopolitical point of view, I think it's easy. Do we want to live in a world in which Putin can get away with what he's doing? That's really the question Americans have to ask themselves.
So alternatively, let's imagine that. Let's imagine a world where we decide to pull out. The US decides, Congress votes against more support for Ukraine, and Ukraine eventually runs out of money, bankrupts, or is overrun because of the lack of military support. What do you think the world looks like? What happens next with the world's dictators?
I mean, that's the world of the 30s, right? Czechoslovakia, other countries in Asia don't get any help, don't get any support. The dictators test us. We're found lacking, as Churchill famously said, and unfortunately and sadly and tragically, and then they do more. And other dictators emerge to also see if what they can do and what they can take. So it's not Putin's encouraged, Xi is encouraged, Iran pays no price for supporting Hamas on the one hand, or for helping Russia on the other. All these there are Republican hawks who want to be very anti-Iran because they are or they pretend to be very pro-Israel. But who's Iran's greatest buddy in the world right now? Russia, right? Pretty much. What does Xi think sitting in China, watching us pull away from Ukraine? The idea that we're going to defend Taiwan when we don't defend Ukraine, a country right in Europe with bordering on 6 NATO allies, that we're going to go 10,000 miles and defend an island against China. I mean, I'm for defending Taiwan, don't get me wrong, but that's totally ridiculous, that argument. So a lot of disingenuous arguments are being made by people who want to be nice to Putin, who believe in America first, who believe in American isolationism, as to why we shouldn't help Ukraine. But they are disingenuous. I think we need to be honest about that. They're not really good arguments, or even in many cases, sincere arguments. And I think the good news is since February 24th, 2022, the American public's been pretty good. I mean, in a sense, given how much we'd been told by President Obama and then President Trump in very different ways, that we should concentrate on nation building at home, that we can't afford to be involved all over the world. And when we get involved, things go badly. The American public's been pretty good in this case. I think they see right and wrong. They see good and evil. They see our strategic interests. Some of the European nations have been better than I expected. And some of the, especially the neighboring nations to Russia, the Balts and the Nordic nations and Central European nations, see what's at stake. And I think people back here have learned from them too. So I think this is not a close call, and we need to just push through here in the next few weeks, really, in Congress, to make sure Ukraine has the funding that it needs. I wish they'd gotten a little more advanced weaponry early on. I still think there are some things we could do more of, but at least we can't cut back.
Okay, so if you were talking to an American today who was undecided on this issue and said, I don't know, should we really stick with Ukraine, or is it time to get out? What would be the argument you would make to them?
That the consequences of getting out could be and probably would be really disastrous. The consequences of staying in are what? $60 billion is what President Biden's asking for. I mean, that's not a huge amount in our federal budget or even in our defense budget. And we are crippling Putin's military, which could otherwise be used to do very bad things. And we're standing up to Putin. Then you can go through the whole litany of things that would happen if we didn't stand up to Putin. So I personally believe the positive case for Ukraine. I so admire Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. I so admire what they're trying to do in building a democracy there. And I think that's so important for the future of Europe, maybe ultimately for the future of Russia, and for the future of the world. We can't have a situation where the number of democracies is shrinking, the democratic frontier is receding, and we're sort of desperately trying to hold on to a few of them. That's not a healthy situation. But so I would make the positive case for Ukraine, myself. But I think I've seen some polling and focus groups on this. Americans, understandably, it's a long way away. They don't really know that much about it. But I think the negative case against letting Putin win, that is a very easy case for people to understand.
Bill, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Hey, it's been my pleasure, and keep up the good work.
Thanks.